Welcome to the RSA at LSU event for the State of Rhetoric Parlor. This is a new chapter for us at LSU. For those of you that don't know, some undergrads are like, why am I here besides for extra credit? RSA is the Rhetorical Society of America, and basically what they do is Rhetorical Society of America tries to gather a bunch of disciplines from different areas: English, communication, poli-sci, linguistics, sociology, to focus on what is rhetoric and how we can kind of blend these different fields of study together. So what we've done is we've put together this parlor. We've invited some special guest speakers in the forms of communication scholars and English scholars in the rhetoric idea. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about it, and for what we're talking about is unending conversations, and that's kind of our theme. Kenneth Burke is a rhetorician, and one of the things that we wanted to focus on was how do we have these conversations in academia. And so one of the things that we started when we started the project is we'd go to meetings, we're starting what the project is, and we'd have meetings where we're like, well, what are we doing? What are we doing? What is everything going on? Yeah, I don't know. Oh my God, I'm so confused. And so we would have these meetings, and so we structured the organization. In our meetings would typically flow from the meetings, and we would, true Burkean fashion, we would go to the chimes. And at the chimes, we would have food and refreshment and put things together. And so at these events, what would happen is we start talking about rhetoric and what rhetoric is, and we get into arguments and talk about like how do we push scholarship to undergrads to understand what rhetoric is and how is this going to be important to us. We find out stuff about our own research, how people look at things through different perspectives, and kind of put all this stuff together. So in doing that, we've invited 5 different scholars to come and speak to us. We have Dr. Andy King, Dr. William Bowles, Dr. McCann, and Dr. Weinstein. And then also Dr. Billy Sauce, who might be running late, so when he comes in late, we'll clap or do something. Appreciate it. All right, so without further ado, because I know you don't want to talk to me, you want to hear from the great minds that we have here. I would like to first introduce a man that probably needs no introduction, a gentleman and a scholar of many levels. He is a former president of the Kenneth Burke Society. He is also one of the founders of the Kenneth Burke Journal. He's directed over 18 master's theses and over 20 dissertations in his career, and he's also Kenneth Burke's best friend?
Good friend.
Good friend. Good friend. Right, so
when he was inebriated, he helped me.
Yes. So we have Kenneth Burke's good friend, Dr. Andy King.
Rhetoricians like to do. I'm a man whose world is in yellow leaf. It means I've been here forever. My future has no constituency. So it's appropriate that I'll give you a fragmentary and very brief history of rhetoric on this campus. It's always dangerous to speak of the origins of rhetoric, because you push the origins, you go farther and farther back. Lady Chatwith, then resident in India in the 19th century, the famous Lady Chatwith, once asked the holy man of Rawalpindi, Sukundar Das, his views on the world. How, she said, is the world suspended in space? And he said, in my religion, we believe that the Lord Krishna holds up the earth. And Lady Chatwith asked, but what is it that holds up Lord Krishna? And he said, I believe that he is standing on a very large turtle. And what holds up the turtle, she said? The turtle is resting on another very, very large turtle. And what holds up that turtle? And he said, my dear lady, don't you understand? It is turtles all the way down. That's the difficulty with finding origins. I spent some time in the archives in Hill Memorial about 10 years ago, discovered that the very first appearance of rhetoric on this campus was when it was a military school. In the curriculum, there was a course in letter writing. Ars Dictamen probably used the Anonymous of Bologna, 1283 to say that. For the cadets in the early military academy, letter writing was important. But that was the first year of the war, and so I could never find out whether it was actually taught or not, because the military school almost fell apart. There was nothing further about rhetoric until the 1880s, when an officer named Captain Hawkins, I'm sorry. He was an instructor in debate here. And in addition to reading Whately, the cadets were also assigned Seneca, whose books on Roman declamation, of course, are still studied by classical scholars. In his last year, 1899, Captain Hawkins inaugurated a course called Rhetoric find a description of it, but that was the only course with rhetoric in the title that did not deal with composition or writing until 1920. In 1910, the speech department was formed with one person. Well, when you look at it, the organizational chart of the university, there were lots and lots of departments with only one person. I discovered he was the only member of the department until the close of the Great War in 1918, when there was a sudden boom in enrollment at LSU. By 1926, there were 5 people, 2 women and 3 men, and they taught puppetry, stagecraft, playwriting, platform reading, but they also taught American and British public address, or oratory as they were called. And in 1926, they already used the new Neo-Aristotelian method, because in 1925, bursting like a nova in the heavens, James Winans of Cornell University wrote the Literary Criticism Oratory. And of course, during the 1920s, the English department was going insane over criticism. We finally found our ground. We've been reaching for our ground and finally found it. If you look at the literary and rhetorical criticism of the 19th century, it's ephemera, you know. It has no order. It's got criticism. But suddenly everything changed. Essentially, it used Ciceronian canonical categories, much more than Aristotle, even though we called it that. But it gave rigor and structure to an activity that had been formless, featureless, lacking in substance. And this they followed the English department that had routinized criticism and given it a central place. Both rhetorical critics in speech and new critics at the University of Chicago called themselves Aristotelian. During the 1930s, rhetorical methods were practiced in English departments by Robert Penn Warren and Cleon Brooks, who we'll hear more about later. They were profoundly influenced by Ivor Armstrong Richards, who wrote on the aesthetic power of form, how we're seduced by form, we're socialized to forms, and all artists have to do, of course, is get us to participate in the form, and suddenly we're like corpses in the hands of a corpse washer. They were also influenced by a man I knew for a quarter century, Kenneth Burke, who was also writing about the power of form. I. Richards and Cleon Brooks, of course, collaborated in books of rhetoric and poetic, and they became great authorities. But in 1985, when Robert Penn Warren came back, he was still bitter about leaving. Still bitter. He never got over it. He said, by God, they wanted to give that damn tiger a richer meat diet. It was my salary or giving meat to the tiger. That's not true, but that's the way he thought. Somehow he thought that had happened. He was still angry about the way he was treated here. And he said rhetoric had been reduced to a kind of trade school formulaic writing. He often was hard to bear in that way. So I screwed up my courage at the sticking point, and I said, will you come to supper at my house? And he said, will Emerson and Thoreau be there? And I said, no, I think they're in the spiritual world. And he said, I ain't a-coming, by God. In 1984, Richard Weaver, a young rhetorician who had fallen under the influence of the fugitive poets at Vanderbilt, came here to complete his PhD. And a few years later, he produced the great Ideas of Consequences and the Ethics of Rhetoric. The latter asserting that there's a moral hierarchy of argumentative forms. Many arguments are cheap and trashy, and others are transcendent and beautiful. During the 1970s and early 80s, there was a Richard Weaver Society on this campus. Hardly anyone remembers it. We met and drank green tea and had shortbread cookies the first Wednesday of every month. But these things die. I mean, these things are very fragile. People leave, suddenly a lot of people left and went on sabbatical, and I went on sabbatical, came back, it was gone. An important figure was Waldo Braden, who first came down from Iowa saying, I'm going to do missionary work, by God, I'm going to beat back the darkness in the Deep South. And he made Southern oratory a major force. He was a powerful personality. His students were important in the legislature, one that occupied the position John Hilario has now, and regularly they controlled the Finance Committee. His student, of course, James Carville, who was the Clintons' consigliere, was one of the people he summoned to his aid when the dean was trying to merge the communication department with journalism. And the dean was a fellow named Snyder. He's long gone. But he resigned shortly after having a conversation with the president. And the president said, some very powerful people in the legislature, Braden's former students called me, including the lieutenant governor, and the one who's in charge of our funding. And I think that they told me that their professor was very, very unhappy. And I think maybe you ought to go somewhere. And he left. He was very powerful. But he often worked with members of English and history departments on rhetorical matters, particularly those who were interested in the history of Southern military and religious discourse. His contribution was about the use of mythic narratives in Southern oratory. I've tried to get Burke here many times because he used to come out to go to Arizona, where we had lots of money to bring him out then, and he always wanted extra kinds of things, saying, by God, I think I should get an extra week of vacation in Florida after this is over. He came from northern New Jersey, and his farm was a mess. There was, well, I won't talk about that. But we had James J. Murphy, the great medieval scholar here. We had Campbell and Jamerson, the founders of genre criticism. And we used to, when I first came here, I had an opportunity to teach. I realized time is passing. I can hear its chariot, wings of the chariots beating in some between chariots. But at any rate, they told me I could teach medieval rhetoric. It was at Arizona. And I got to my first medieval seminar. Half the students were from English, and some were from speech communication, and I had a few political science. And I said, you really are here? A seminar in medieval rhetoric? Why are you here for? And a youth with little golden round Ben Franklin glasses in the first row said, because, man, it's the only thing that's not bogus. I realized it was home. But cultures change, and pretty soon no one wanted medieval rhetoric. It died, so things are okay. We used to teach classical medieval rhetoric. It was a bridge course for both English and speech students, and we had Lloyd Bitzer here, who talked about the rhetorical situation, which is a karate influence, fortuitous things. You get the right message, the right speaker, the right audience, the right moment, and so on. And it almost never happens. There are all sorts of misfires, things that almost made it when we tried to bring departments together for rhetoric. We had a thing in the early 90s called British Studies, which relied heavily on rhetoric. And we had people from political science. We had one of the directors was William Parent from political science, Baynard Cowan, who I miss tremendously, from English, and me. And 20 years ago we tried to do such things, but somehow these things start with a tremendous enthusiasm, tremendous drive, and they flame out. Okay. Well, this is, I am a man in yellow leaf, and this is my last roll call with you, but I am starting a business. I have a farm called, we've named the Renaissance Farm in the foothills of the Adirondacks. Perhaps you've been up there, the upper Hudson River. Thomas Cole and the Hudson River School painted so many beautiful trees up there. In the fall, it's incredible. You nearly go insane. You walk up and it's scarlet, and it's purple, and it's russet, and the little birch, the white birch trees have golden heads. It's eye-rocking. But at any rate, we've retooled the place as a place for the farm, which is not a great success. For artists and writers to come to work, we have yoga classes, we have a large swimming pool on the farm, we have a dormitory for them, we have fresh garden produce for them to eat, and the artists and writers and people and craftspeople do their work alone in their various places, and then at noon they come together and swim, and then it's cool up there, we're 1,500 feet above sea level, so you can actually enjoy the summer. You can actually go outside and enjoy it. And there are horse farms there and dairy farms, and it's beautiful. And we hope it'll become the intellectual center of the United States. But at night we walk in the cool mountain meadows up there and talk. And fortunately, my brother made a lot of money in advertising because we're not making any money so far. It's draining money like crazy. But we actually hope to make a bit of money eventually. But people are coming there and unplugging. And I will be here in the winter. And I hope sometime, because people don't go to farms in the winter, and the place is buried under heavy snow. So I'll be back in Louisiana every winter, and I hope you'll invite me to one of these meetings. But I'm very grateful that you gave me a final chance to talk to you about rhetoric and the importance of rhetoric at this institution. Thank you.